There are a lot of stereotypes in our society about expectant mothers. She looks radiant. She has morning sickness. She's in a delicate condition. There are also a lot of stereotypes about fathers who are expecting. He did his part the first night. I don't know what he has to worry about. He doesn't have to carry that thing around for 9 months. Our guest today wants you to know that expecting a child is just as wonderful, just as miraculous, and just as scary for fathers as it is for mothers. And that's what we'll be talking about today on Fathers Are Parents Too. Our guest today is author Armin Brott, and he has written The Expectant Father. And Armin, would you just tell us basically what this book is about, and then we'll go into it a little bit in depth?
Sure. Well, basically it's about the 9 months of pregnancy, but it's all from the father's perspective, what the man is going through emotionally, psychologically, even physically at various points during the pregnancy. And it kind of espouses my basic philosophy of pregnancy for men, which is that it's a very important thing to do to get involved in the pregnancy. The more involved the guy is during the pregnancy, the more involved he's going to be afterwards. And I think a lot of men just don't know a lot of stuff about pregnancy and childbirth and have a tendency to kind of withdraw from the process. And so this is designed to take them through on a month-by-month basis what's going on with the baby a little bit, what's going on with their partner a little bit, but mostly what's going on within their minds and ways to actively stay involved to make the pregnancy their own.
Okay, now, obviously there are changes the mother is going through as the baby's developing, and so that leads to what the baby's going through, but it sounds like you're saying the changes the man's going through, or internal things, not... I mean, there are other books out there that I've seen where they talk about, as a father, how you can get involved, you know, feel her stomach and listen to the heartbeat and know that she's going through mood swings and wants ice cream at 2 in the morning. But
Right.
those are all outward things for the guy to understand, but what I'm hearing is more his own internal changes. What sorts of things would those be?
Well, there's a lot. It's almost exactly the same thing as what women go through psychologically, except that men are about a trimester behind in the whole process. There's a sense of ecstasy in the beginning, usually in a sense of saying, you know, I'm kind of a big stud because I got my wife pregnant, and a lot of men feel that kind of thing. And then they forget about it for a little while because there's nothing going on. It's hard to see unless the wife happens to be vomiting all the time, and you have a little bit more idea that there's something going on.
The Linda Blair method of getting in touch with...
Exactly,
okay.
Without the crosses. And then there's, after that, they have a tendency to get men and women, to get very withdrawn, essentially, to think about what's going to happen. How am I going to be able to afford this baby? Oh my God, did we make a mistake? Am I ready to be a father? What kind of a father am I going to be? Am I going to be like my dad? Am I not going to be like my dad? There are just a lot of things, and it's fortunate that we have 9 months to prepare for them, for both men and women. But women have, again, it's sort of this extra trimester in the beginning to get a little bit more acclimated to the whole process.
You know, it sounds like, from what you're saying and from what I infer, because you wrote a book about this, that this is a common experience then for men. It's not just what, say, you went through or a particular man went through, worrying about, you know, money or thinking he's a stud. You found enough common experience to write a book about, and so where did you draw this from? There are studies out there, actually?
Well, there are very, very few studies. Most people haven't really been doing much tracking of men's experiences in pregnancy. In fact, when I was doing my research for this, one of the first articles that I found in a scientific publication about men and pregnancy was called "Pregnancy as a Precipitant of Mental Illness in Men," which sort of gives you an idea of what it was looked at.
Yeah.
You know, the man gets woman gets pregnant, the man goes nuts.
Crazy, yeah.
That's it. He's just out the first window he can find. But it is a very common thing, and what happens is that a lot of times men don't want to talk about it because we're supposed to be there for our wives. We're supposed to be supportive of her, and we're supposed to, as you said, understand the mood swings and the hormonal changes, and she may be crying, and we're supposed to be supportive and physically supportive and worry about her. And so we say, well, you know, I got a lot of stuff going on inside of my mind too, but I don't want to bother her with it because she doesn't need the extra stress. And so what happens is that he doesn't bother anybody with it, and begins to internalize it, and this kind of thing can result in a withdrawing from the pregnancy and a lack of interest in getting involved.
Which is why people then think that there is no involvement or connection, because it's sort of a vicious cycle then. I read in the book that a large percentage, and I don't remember exactly how many, and hopefully you do, of men go through a period in the beginning where they actually don't believe they're the ones that sired this child. But you attribute that to not having any sort of disbelief in their wife, but more they can't believe they could be involved in something so miraculous. It's almost like it must be an immaculate conception, because they couldn't have been involved with something like this. Can you talk about that a little? That was really amazing to me.
Yeah, it's a very interesting kind of a thing. It's not, again, it's as you said, not so much a suspicion that it was another man, but that to create life seems like such something that's beyond the capacity of human beings. Particularly, I think, in the minds of men, it's beyond the capacity of men. We hear a lot about women and their ability to produce life and to carry life, and so we kind of expect that from women. But to say, oh my God, I participated in creating a human being, it really is kind of a mind-blowing experience for a lot of people. And really the numbers are sort of surprising. It was about 60% of people in a couple different studies had this fear, or not a fear, it's just sort of an inability to believe a little bit. They get over it after a while, and you know, there are not a lot of people who are really suspicious that their wives were elsewhere at the critical moment.
Divine.
Right.
That's an amazing thing to think about, and when I read that, it really brought home for me how little we think about what men go through, because clearly it means they think this is an incredible, amazing, moving thing, and who do men talk to? Who should they talk to about these sorts of things they're going through, so they don't close off? And what do you advise men to do to get involved and to feel connected?
Well, I think some of the things that you mentioned before that are covered in some other books, I think that I advise them in a different way. I think it's absolutely critical to go to every single doctor's appointment you can go to. Most of the time, you'll be bored out of your mind. The doctor says, hey, how you doing? While your partner says, fine, and you go home, and nothing ever happened. Nobody even takes their clothes off. But a lot of other times, there's going to be a heartbeat to hear, and it's things like the heartbeat, the ultrasound, getting to measure the growing belly and to watch as it all progresses really helps the reality of it sink in.
Now, don't you find when a father accompanies the mother to the doctor that there's sort of this innate, I don't want to say it's a put down, but this dismissing of his role even there? Oh, what a wonderful husband he is accompanying his wife to her doctor's appointment. And what can an expectant father do to sort of proactively get the other people involved in this pregnancy to see he is not just a passive participant, but he's more actively involved than just that first night, and wants to be? That's
a very hard thing. I think it really depends. I was fortunate enough that my wife's OBs for both of our pregnancies were very, very welcoming and responded very well to my questions about the pregnancy and what was going on. And I think the thing to do is ask a lot of intelligent questions. Maybe one of the ways to get most involved.
And one of the things you talk about in your book is that phenomena, and I could relate to it having been through my own pregnancy, of strangers coming up to your wife, or if you're the woman, up to you, and feeling it's perfectly okay to, touch the belly, even though they've, or to comment on the burgeoning bosom, or just very intimate sorts of transgressions that ordinarily, people would not do to strangers. And you commented on what the man goes through almost in two levels, because the one level is this person is invading their wife, and on another level it's just very invasive just to your own self, because that's your space. So I find that very interesting, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that a little.
It's the kind of thing that used to really just bother me incredibly, and especially in places like Safeway or any kind of grocery store. People would come up to Andrea and they'd say, oh, it's really considered good luck in Borneo to rub the belly. So, this isn't Borneo. Get away from my wife. It incensed me a lot. It was an interesting thing because it didn't bother her very much at all. She seemed to feel that there is a sort of a public nature to pregnancy, and the whole world being a village and all this stuff, and that we're all raising everybody's children in some sort of, it's not happening here, but in the perfect world. And I think my experience in talking to women is that it doesn't bother them nearly as much. I think that they may not like being touched a lot. What really is even more disturbing, perhaps, is the stories that you get. just waiting in line at the checkout counter. You know, somebody comes up and says, "Oh, you're pregnant? Oh, well, let me tell you about my wife's 37.5-hour labor and the emergency C-section and the blood and everything else." You know,
just what you want to hear
just
when
to
you're
hear
trying to
exactly
figure out
what
what
you
you're
wanna
going to be going through. Now, in a few
Right.
minutes, we're going to go over and take some questions from the audience. But
Okay.
before we do that, I'd like to have you talk a little bit about, and you address this in your book as well, a lot of our viewing audience are single fathers who may or may not already have children, but some of them are expecting other children. And often we hear about fathers who have become disunited from the mother during the pregnancy. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for those fathers as to ways they can maybe dialogue with the mother to still feel connected, to what can they do in that situation to still try and achieve some sort of connection, which is very important in some places. In certain states, it's required in order to demonstrate your devotion to this child that's not even yet born, so that you can be involved with them after they're born.
Right. That can be a really tough issue also. Part of it is that women have control, obviously, over what's growing inside of their bodies. And so if they don't want to have anything to do with the husband, they don't really have to, and there's nothing you can do to force the relationship. I think if there's a split up going on, which these kinds of things happen and there's nothing that can be done about it, it's very important to try to be as civil as possible and to try to explain to the woman, if you're the man, to explain to her that you really want to be there, that you really consider that that's your child, that you're going to be responsible, not only financially afterwards, but that you're going to be a good father. And I think to be aware of the impact that a father can have on children by taking a look at the book. I've got a lot of interesting kinds of statistics and interesting narration of the kinds of serious impact that a father has. Fathers who are very actively involved with their kids, those kids do better in school, they have a lower dropout rate, they are less promiscuous, they don't use drugs as much. I mean, the kinds of things that are of concern to all of us. And I think to allow a woman to decide to make that she's going to raise a kid on her own without a protest of some kind is an irresponsible thing to do in the father. And it's hard to get back, and to get back in once you're out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Again, you know, as you said, you're in determining whether you're a good father or not. If you step out of the way for a while.
So much better to make that continue.
Right, it's better to get there. And again, because psychologically, men who are actively involved in the pregnancy and who consider themselves to be the father of the child instead of just the coach at the Lamaze class are much, much more involved fathers afterwards, because they had a connection with the baby before it was born, really.
And they really felt it as an entity, even though it's housed in there, huh?
Right. I mean, a lot of men describe seeing that when the baby first comes out, however, vaginally or with a C-section, meeting the baby, meeting someone they've already known, in a way, that because they've seen him grow up kind of on the ultrasounds and heard the heartbeat and maybe talked. A lot of guys talk to the baby through the woman's abdomen, and it's a nice way of describing it, I think, is kind of meeting a friend.
That's nice. All right, we're going to go over to the audience now and take some questions. Okay, I think we have some questions here. Yes, stand up, please.
Hi. My son was born at home. I was present for his birth, and his mother had had a previous child, and she had been a midwife, so she knew exactly what she was doing, and it was very emotional being at my son's birth, but it didn't really affect me psychologically that much. My observation is that the next year, when I was bonding with my child, that was a very profound thing in my life. And I'm wondering, do you talk about that in your book, or have you thought about doing a follow-up volume?
I talk about it a little bit in this book, and I am actually doing a follow-up volume for the first 3 years, kind of a dad's guide to the first 3 years, and continuing the same sort of progression, what's going on with the baby and what's going on psychologically, and ways to stay involved. What you're describing is a very, very common thing, that men have a tendency to look, or to imagine their children a little bit older, and to want to have some more interaction with the child. That really helps a man to bond, as we call it. And in the beginning, the first couple of weeks, first month or so, the baby's not smiling except if he's got gas. And you know, they're really not doing much except flailing their arms around, and it's hard to get attached to something like like that, and it really isn't. And there are plenty of women who don't either. You shouldn't be thinking that women, all of them, just bond immediately. So it is very common afterwards, a couple of months down, down the road, to get much more involved as the child smiles, as he can grasp things, and you can kind of play little games and things. It's very common. And that continues on for years as well.
So you're working on this book now?
I'm working on it right now.
And it's due out?
It's probably due out not for another year or so. It takes the slowness of the publishing industry.
So the timing is perfect, though. The people who buy your book now will be going through birth in the first year or so, and just in time your next book will be out.
There is a little bit of that in here. I mean, this book is not only pregnancy and childbirth. It talks about the first month or so, and there will be some overlap, of course, in the second book, but not that much. And then also a lot of the kinds of things that maybe we'll talk about, the different kinds of barriers that fathers who really want to be involved with their kids face.
One of the things that I found really interesting in your book was that along with the comments on how to stay involved and what changes you're going through, you also offer a lot of practical advice. You talk about selecting a doctor and selecting a hospital versus a home delivery and what to look for in both. And you even, I noticed, talk about establishing a college fund. So you are talking about things that are really very practical and looking far ahead as well, and I just want to say I think that's really neat.
Well, thanks. Again, that's a very important kind of thing, is that men are prone to feeling a little bit left out of the process. And if you can sit down and say, all right, baby's not here yet, but I think we can start figuring out how we're going to save some money to pay for college. And we can develop the plans. You can't really put much away in a bank account without a Social Security number, and you can't have a Social Security number until you have a baby. But to start thinking about these kinds of things is important, and to be involved in selecting the doctor, the OB, if your partner doesn't have one, is very important, and to be involved in selecting a pediatrician is very important. It gives everybody the idea, the very correct idea, that the man wants to be involved.
Yes.
Yeah, you've gone through some of the emotional changes that go through pregnancy with a father. Another emotional time that most of us are familiar with is the time of divorce, which is a wrenching, splitting type of experience. Have you come across any studies in the research for your book that happen as did with me, that the two experiences happen at the same time?
Well, it's
how many of those go crazy?
I'm sorry?
How many of those guys go crazy?
Are those the ones that jump out the window? Or?
Those are the guys who head for the windows, right? It's a very, very stressful thing. People have a tendency to think, well, you just have a kid, no problem. It's not a no problem kind of thing. In something like 90% of marriages or couples, the birth of a child is a very stressful experience. And if you were not particularly welcomed during the pregnancy process, you're not going to be welcomed afterwards. And that is something, again, that women have a great deal of control over, that men tend to be as involved with their children and involved in the pregnancy as their partners will let them. And we have a lot of societal stereotypes where women are told that their worth is what they can produce out of their womb, just as men are told that their worth is what they can produce, and that ends up in their wallets. And so women are frequently not very giving, perhaps, or not willing to share the power that they have in the home, just as men have been unwilling to share the power that they have in the workplace. It's the same kind of thing, and I kind of refer to that, that contrast as the men's other glass ceiling, that women are prevented from advancing in the workplace, and men are prevented through a variety of circumstances from becoming as involved as they'd like to be. But the divorce issue, it's not uncommon. There's a breakdown in communication that happens when you begin to focus on the child instead of on what movie you're going to go to that night, which sounds sort of trivial, but it can lead to a big split if it isn't managed properly, and that happens, unfortunately, all too often.
Armin, with the advent of sort of a national family leave policy, you mentioned the men's other glass ceiling, and I've also heard under that umbrella being staying home as a stay-at-home dad, and I'm wondering if you are finding in researching your book or your next book that the fathers who are more involved during the pregnancy tend to also want more to stay at home themselves and take advantage of family leave policy, and how that might be changing those after birth time family dynamics. I know myself a couple of fathers who said, I really would like to stay home and be the primary caretaker for the first year and let her go back to work if she's willing. And I'm just wondering what your experience has been in researching. Have you found more fathers wanting to do that? Is that...
Yeah, there's a really interesting problem with that, which is that there are a tremendous amount of fathers want to do it, but very few of them actually do it. And that's just sort of the way things shake out. And there's a couple of reasons for that, I think. One is that family leave is unpaid in this country, and generally because men are making more than women are making, if you got to do without one income, you're going to do without the woman's income, which makes some sense. That the problem with that, or the shortcoming with that particular analysis, is that even in places where there is paid leave, fewer than 1% of men take it when they have the opportunity. So it's not only the money. Then there's the even more real problem of the career suicide fear. Basically, that men are afraid that if they take time off from work, they're going to be perceived as not being serious about their jobs, and they're going to end up losing that promotion or not becoming partner in that law firm or whatever. And it is a very real fear. There was a study that was done a few years ago that found that 40-something% of CEOs of big corporations felt that men should take 0 time for paternity leave.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a sad commentary.
It really is. I think we had another question here. Excuse me.
I felt very thrown back and forth between two situations. In one, when my wife wanted me to take more responsibility because she was tired that I needed to do more, and then on other occasions she felt threatened by that was her job as the nurturer to be taking care of the children, and it was very difficult to balance that with my partner who wanted to be the nurturing person but couldn't do it all. It was very difficult to read the cue and know when it was time to support in which way. You find that very much?
That's again a very common kind of thing. It gets back to what I was talking about with the one of the components of the glass ceiling is you're describing it perfectly, that women frequently will put up barriers in a way to men's getting involved. It's kind of a mixed signal. I want you to really be involved, but I don't want you to be quite as involved as I am. And that can be very confusing, and it can really undermine the man's confidence as a parent. I mean, if you think of, you probably have seen this 100 times, a guy's got a baby, the baby starts to cry, and mom comes in and says, oh, I can, let me take her, I know what she needs, she's hungry, she's tired. You know, the way she learned how to tell the difference between the I'm hungry, the change me, and the I'm tired cries is by practicing. And that's the only way that the guy's going to learn how to do it. And when somebody else comes in and takes the baby away from the husband, it reinforces the idea that women know everything, that men don't know everything, and then men get very unconfident in their abilities.
Armin, as I was reading the book, one of the things that I found myself thinking over and over is, this is a book that one expects, no pun intended, is geared for fathers, expectant fathers. It's called The Expectant Father. But what I found myself thinking is, this book should be read by every single expectant mother. Because I felt, and again I was referring back to my own experience being an expectant mother and having a husband and having just no clue what he was going through until 17 years later when I read your book. I thought every mother needs to know this, because you define and describe so well what the male experience is. And I think that just as for years and years and years we have been told that men need to be supportive of their wives going through pregnancy and need to know what mental changes they're going through and the physical changes and everything, I think women really need to know this about men. And so while I think this is probably a liberating book for men in as much as they're going to read it and say, wow, I thought I was the only one that thought, my wife had some kind of immaculate intervention. I think it's really important for women to know these are the fears and concerns and good feelings as well that their husbands are going through. And then I thought, I don't really know if I know that many women that would want to know, that would want to be, and I'm not saying women are not into what their partners are feeling, but they're so involved in what's going on themselves that to have that extra burden, and that brought it right back to how you opened the show, saying that men have been taught not to overburden their wives. Right. And so I'm wondering if you can comment on that. During your research at all, did you interview women at all to sort of get their perspective of what the men were going through, or do you have any just anecdotal information you could share with us about that?
Well, Yeah, I mean, I did talk to a lot of women, and I think the consensus was that a lot of the stuff that I thought was very important in my own experience, and a lot of the stuff that I would kind of say, well, this is an interesting thing I came up with in a research project or found in a journal someplace. What do you think? The consensus was basically, that's just completely ridiculous. I never would have thought of that. But I think you're absolutely right that it is very interesting, and the women that I have heard from who've read the book have found it enlightening. And the good thing is that I think women will actually read it, because women are really interested in all aspects of pregnancy and childbirth, and they do tend to read more. There are hundreds of books out there for women, and again, there are very few out there for men. And so men need to have it, but I think women will also.
I actually read in a review of the book, the reviewer suggested that the book was, excuse me, the book was a perfect gift for expectant couples, and that they should provide 2 copies, one for each parent.
Oh, thank you.
And I thought that was a great idea.
I think so too. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz. You really only need one, but 2 is better.
Well, that's true. I guess that's good for you also. But so they could each have their own copy and share it with friends or whatever. In the last couple of minutes that we have, do you have any sort of overriding one piece of advice that you would give first an expectant father and then an expectant mother about sharing this experience or being sensitive to acts about what's going on in the other partner, or one for each?
Okay, I think I could do the same one for both of them. I think is don't underestimate your partner's commitment to you for both sides. It's an interesting thing when it comes to sex, for example, is that men think that their wives are feeling fat and unattractive, although men find a pregnant body very stimulating. And women think that their husbands are thinking that they're fat and unattractive, although women also find the pregnant body, they find themselves, it's a very erotic kind of a thing. And so they're both sitting around saying, well, she doesn't want it, he doesn't want it, and they both do. And not only sexually, just to be intimate, just to be cuddling and things like that. And that's a very common thing, is that the husband says, I don't want to bother her with my emotional problems, and she says, I don't want to bother him with my emotional problems, and they don't when they just need to talk about it, and they'll find out there's a lot of common ground.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being here.
Pleasure.
Thank you for being here, and the book is available in bookstores everywhere.
Everywhere.
And it's called The Expectant Father, and join us next time on Fathers Are Parents Too.